Delighted to say James Skehill is with us. James, good morning to you. How are you?
How are you folks? Are you well?
How did Limerick create the space they created? What was it that they did that prevented Cork from being able to mark them? Is it down to Cork? Is it down to Limerick?
It's down to both, really. I think Cork were quite. They probably had in their heads that they're going to follow certain people, and try and nullify them man to man as opposed to playing his own defence and trying to cut out ball. But that happened early, and what you saw then was Morrissey and Hegarty, and they were just moving with freedom to go where they wanted to go. Case in point was Hegarty's, where he showed up for both of his goals. Like, he showed up on the opposite wing to where he usually is, and that's terribly difficult as a defence to manage. And if you're kind of pre-programmed, to play in a certain way, then trying to adjust is hugely difficult. And there was a massive amount of damage during the first 15 minutes. But then you have to also consider that Limerick's game plan and the way they operate is so in sync, that their creation of space is actually second to none. It's incredible. And that's huge kudos to the likes of Paul Kinnerk and John Kyle, who were able to implement that and get the players to execute that on the day of the game. But it looked like a massacre in the first 20 minutes, because you could see, as a hurling person, you could see the creation of space was just going to be a recipe for disaster for Cork, and they couldn't manage it. But then you look at Cork's body language as well, and in particular the two goals, there was no pressure applied, real pressure to apply to Hegarty coming through, especially from the likes of Rob Downey, who was big and physical and should have really closed space to top of Hegarty instead of inviting him on. You invite someone like him on at pace, you've absolutely no chance to stop him or even to slow him down. You have to go meet him and cut off his angles, cut off his space. So I think it was a combination of both, to be honest.
The second Limerick goal in particular, it comes after a point from Cork, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier on. It was a hard fought, hard won point, gets the crowd, the Cork crowd going, because they're back to a point behind. But it's a puck out, caught uncontested, passed into the full forward line uncontested, laid off to Gillette, who's totally free, back of the net. And essentially that was the ball game right there, because there was Cork could not come back from that, and the body language thing happens there. How does that happen from a puck out?
I agree. I think so. I'd say there was probably an assumption on behalf of Cork that the puck out wasn't going to come 100 yards, so they probably were going to leave unoccupied the space, to say in the full back line, and say leave it for 2-on-2 for a moment, and then try win primary or secondary ball on the half back line. And that didn't happen. When you allow a half forward line, especially Limerick, especially the players with Limerick, and who they can feed off each other with simple passes. So when you allow a half forward line to win primary possession, you're in trouble. You're in serious trouble, because what you've got oncoming runners straight away to take the ball. So that one pass you talked about, you're like, when that pass is given, 9 times out of 10 the Limerick lads are in a couple of yards of space, which is enough for the guys inside to time their run, to confuse the Cork full back line a bit, and then create space. And that sounds quite simplistic. It sounds like that you'd nullify it quite easily, but in practice it's extremely difficult. So that the first thing that the Cork had to do was get the ball to ground. I wouldn't even contest the ball with Limerick forwards. I just wouldn't. I would just stay. I wouldn't even put my hand up to catch it. I would just bring the ball to ground and try to create some rooks, and then create a line of defence behind you. Because when you try to go contested and they win the ball off you, there's, as I said to you, they're so in sync. They have such an amount of off the shoulder runners at pace. It's a huge thing to try and stop, and no team has done it so far. And when you look at if you look at the snapshot, just the snapshot of the moment that Flanagan gets the ball, there is literally 40 square yards around him where there's no Cork defender. That for me is criminal. I just think that when Cork were under such pressure there for that 10-minute phase or 8-minute phase, they had to put back an extra body and just stop the rot. And that comes into in-game experience. That comes to probably being exposed to those big games and being exposed to playing teams of that magnitude on a regular basis. So that's not going to come today or tomorrow. But I think there's huge learnings for Cork in that.
That is the type of thing that we have to give Limerick a lot of credit for as well. There was one last thing about this before we get into some of the other things, is that by the middle of the second half, it looked like Cork were out on their feet physically. There's no difference in the strength and conditioning between these two teams, is there? Scientifically, I'm really interested in this, because we assume that everybody's on strength and conditioning programs for the last number of years, and so they're all at a fairly similar level. But it certainly seemed like there was a difference yesterday.
There is, I would say, there's probably no difference in the type of training. There could be a difference in the volume or magnitude of training, and there's also a difference in how long each team has been exposed to that type of training. So I remember playing a challenge game against Limerick last year, down in Limerick. It was just right before we were allowed to get going again. And we were shaking hands after the game. We was over, and I was walking up, and I walked through a straight line heading towards the far goalie, and I met O'Donovan and O'Donoghue, and I met Hegarty, and then I got to Dan Morrissey. And I remember finishing off with Nicky Kees, and I said, "Geez, Nicky, you're the smallest of everyone here, you know." Like, they were absolute, and I can't stress this enough, they're a rugby team. That's what they are, a rugby team. Like, Dan Morrissey is built like Dennis Leamy. You know what I mean? That's the way he is, like. And I think there's a huge difference in the SNC in the sense that where they are in their progression. They have a lot more done than Cork have, obviously. But there's also, strength is one thing, Ger, the conditioning is another thing. Limerick are extremely fit, that's fine, but they're never injured. You know, I never see a guy with a hamstring injury or a quad injury or, you know, dead legs or anything of the sort. So they're conditioned to take the heat for every championship game. And that just brings me back to what I discussed last week or the week before. That's their training. That's their training games inside, that they have literally knocked each other so hard and conditioned each other so hard that they can take anything on a match day. Now, that's probably a bigger point, is it's one thing being strong and doing the exercises and whatnot and, you know, being agile and mobile, but can you be conditioned for the intensity of battle? And as you go on in the championship, the intensity increases and the training volume increases. And, you know, nearly a key thing for a player, 50% of it all is, can he stay fit? And Limerick are always fit. It's amazing.
Why have they managed to open up that sort of a gap then on that level? Like, you would have thought that there are other counties that are very well resourced. There are other counties that have even more years of doing the training at senior level. So do you have any insight into why what Limerick have done has been so much more effective to what the other counties have done?
Yeah, I think something struck with me before. Pat Lamb gave us a talk before in Galway, and he said that amateur teams are always trying to obtain professionalism, and professional teams are always trying to get back to nearly amateurism, connect with communities and connect with people. I look at Limerick and I just think they have an absolutely perfect balance in between, if that makes sense. So they have the perfect balance of professionalism. So they're backed at board level. The clubs are in symmetry. All the guys on the team, let's say, have a common goal and are heading the one direction. There's no egos in management or players alike. And they're being, you know, they're nicely resourced from a financial perspective. So when you put those five together, it's strong. Then you look at their connection with their supporters. And I looked over, I don't know why I was on LinkedIn last night, but I looked over LinkedIn and I saw all the well wishes from their professional careers and companies they're working with, and it screamed of a huge connection, you know. And when a team is successful, you know, nearly everything has to go well for them. So you have to prepare well, play well, and get a bit of luck for a successful team. Preparation is 90% of that, you could say, because it's something you do the most. And I look at Limerick, I just think they're streets ahead. Like my own county, I named 5 points there on the team side of things. We probably have 2 out of 5. You know what I mean? That's decisive. Unless you've got everything, all your ducks in a row, you're going to struggle against Limerick, because when you mix all those items, those tangibles, and then you put the quality of player, that you have together, you've got a huge recipe for success. I was taking some notes after the game yesterday, and I wrote down 6 here, like six for Ireland. Easy for this group. You know, they've got 3 in 4 years, but definitely going to get another one. Like, I can't see anybody stopping them next year. And
we were talking about that, right? Because like they need a rival at this stage, and just looking through how they beat Cork by 8 points in the Munster semi-final. They beat Tip by 5 in the Munster final. Then they beat Waterford by 11, and they just won an All-Ireland final by 16 points. It's a sensational level of progression through the championship, with the one potential caveat being the first half against Tipperary, which, if we're, you know, again clutching for straws here, could tip under Liam Cahill next year with their All-Ireland under-20 team backbone on the sides. Is there something?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Les, because, like, again, I keep talking about the experience is one thing, you know, but with the group being together, Limerick, they're at a level, let's say, where they have their system and their game plans have been tried and tested on numerous occasions. They've been together in probably something like, when you consider over the last 4 or 5 years, Les, they've probably been together for somewhere in the region of 350 to 400 training sessions. So you've got a volume of work put together there with that group. And now you're asking the likes of a Tipperary team, who essentially would be under somewhat of a semi-rebuild, if we're honest, that you're trying to get them to take them on. So the minutes aren't there in the training field. The quality is probably there in the person, It's definitely probably there on the management side of the view. It's probably there on the individual skills of the player. When you piece all that collective together, taking down Limerick is not just one moment of brilliance. It's the sum of all parts. And like that's why you look at Cork yesterday. You're depending on Hoggy. You're depending on Jack O'Connor. You know, when you're depending on individuals against Limerick, you're bet. It's a full symmetrical team effort that's going to take down Limerick.
What would have happened if Gillette had been sent off in the match against Tip? Would they still have won that game?
Oh, no change. No change. I'm convinced of it, you know. I'm absolutely convinced of it. I watched the Sunday game last night, and like they had Gillette, and this is no disrespect to him, like he's top class. They had Gillette in the Sunday game team of the year. And I was thinking, no, like he wasn't. Like, you know, like I think Gillette and Seamus Flanagan and Peter Casey, with the greatest respect in the world now, this sounds bad, are the product of the system, you know? So I think, like, how many opportunities do they forge themselves? A few from turnovers, that's fine, I respect that. But 9 times out of 10, that ball is bounced into space for Seamus Flanagan or Gillette to come onto, and they whip around over the bar. So, like, the likes of their influence on a team is not as great, from anyone from 5 to 12, in my opinion. So if you could take someone like a Pat Ryan, put him in the Gillette role, he mightn't be as efficient on the scoring or the frees, but he'll still do the job that they want him to do. You can take a Graham Mulcahy role and put him in there. So his level of importance is not understated in Limerick, but I don't think it's as grand or vast as others.
Why did Cian Lynch thrive so spectacularly yesterday, James?
Oh, geez, yeah, that is a great question. Here's a number for you, right? So Limerick have scored 8 goals and 108 points in this year's championship. Cian Lynch has assisted 29% of that.
Wow. Like,
when you consider, okay, like of those 108 points, you're probably having the region of 20% frees, okay? Maybe 15-20% frees. So he's just assisted now, not what he scored. He scored another 35 or 6%, you know what I mean? But so one player has almost a third of the influence of the team. So when you put those numbers into perspective, there's no player ever like that has been. Obviously, you have players who have scored. Now, I'm not counting free takers here. I'm counting guys from open play who will assist. There's been no player in recent memory in the last 2 or 3 years, definitely 2 or 3 seasons for sure, that has had the level of influence for him. I think he's in. I don't know the man personally, but from the outside looking in, you think he's just a very free spirit. He's a very, kind of, I'd say, happy guy. You know, doesn't get I wouldn't say he gets too worked up. I'd say he doesn't get too over-focused on the game. He plays with a level of freedom that most players, 95% of players, would only wish to get to. So 95% of players will play with a level of some slight restriction on games, whether that be through nervousness, or that be through, let's say, fear of losing, or fear of a marker, or wherever it is. But I just look at Cian Lynch and think he doesn't actually care who he's marking, where he's playing, you know, like what conditions he's playing in. He's always going to thrive. And like when you put the biggest player on the biggest stage and he thrives the way he did, it's awesome. I actually can't think of a word to describe the man. You know, he's just at a level that is unattainable for others for years to come.
You mentioned there a moment ago that Aaron Gillette and Seamus Flanagan succeed so much because of the system. So is Cian Lynch an exception to the system, or is his brilliance thoroughly planned throughout Kinnerk and Kiley's system as well? How do those two things tally?
I'm glad you actually asked that one, because like when I was talking about Gillette and I was talking about Flanagan, let's say, I was kind of putting their level of influence was probably 7.5, 8 out of 10 because of the system, and the rest was themselves individually. When you look at Cian Lynch, right, he wins the world of dirty ball. So like from a systematic perspective, his influence is probably only done 4 or 5 out of 10 because of it, you know, and the rest is himself creating. Like, how many times does he go in and tap the ball off the ground and get it, go into a ruck, roll it and get it out, you know, or take snapshots in huge traffic with an awful lot of pressure around him. So I think there probably is I would strongly assume that the likes of Kiley and Kinnerk would say, right, we need to get our best players on the ball most often because those players influence the ball best. You know, so like, I know that, let's say from a goal perspective, if we had David Burke on the ball in possession, you know, 13 or 14, 11, 12 or 13 times, he would make a great influence. And I think in the final, against semi-final against Tipperary, he's something like 20 possessions. And look at the influence he had. But the same thing goes for Cian Lynch, you know. When you get him, the more time you get Cian Lynch on the ball, the more damage you can do. And the case in point is the percentage of assists I just spoke about a moment ago. So if you get him on the ball, chances are 1 in 3 possessions, he's going to create a score for you or score himself. So I think there's a collective understanding from the management team, get Cian on the ball. but then you can't underestimate his quality to get himself. You know, I'm laughing here because he's so good. Like, you know, it's just, I'd make you sick.
Can we talk?
But like, you know about, sorry, just about Cork Cork. Interestingly, I was texting one of the previous Clare player last night, and I just had to ask him. I just said, is Cork as good as everyone said? And this is the message. He goes, yeah, he's unbelievable. Trust me, he was brains behind everything. He's a professional coach in amateur game, no ego, completely a player's man. Biggest loss we've ever had. That's from a previous player. That's the effect he's had on a player in Clare. I won't name the player, but you can see the effect that person, a singular person, has, and what he is perceived to be from a previous player. You know, so when you mix that with the quality of players you have, sure, look, hog in and go home.
I was at the game, so I didn't see the TV coverage, but apparently they were oohing and ahhing about something that happened after the second water break, that they were saying, oh, that's got Connacht's fingerprints all over it. I don't know if it was a simple move where everybody was... where the vast majority of the team went out one way to the sideline. Cork followed. The Red Sea parted, literally and metaphorically, and a scoring opportunity came straight off a puck-out.
Yep. And tell you one thing, Ger, I've been behind that. That has happened to me in the goals. When you look at 4 Limerick forwards moving to your right and a midfielder going with them, you're saying, surely be to God, this is going. And the opposite wing forward goes with them. And next thing, a corner forward shoots or full forward goes, and the ball goes there, and you're going, sure, how do you stop that? Because if you stay in your half-back line position, so let's say now number 10 vacates and he shoots across to join the pack, does number 7 follow him, or does he stay? If he follows, 14 or 13 is going to hop in that corner or that wing. If he stays, they'll have numbers on the far side and they overload you. You're just like, you know, and these are in-game decisions to make. Now, you and I are talking about this right now, and you're saying what would be the best way to get around it. But in-game, there at that second, you've got a millisecond to understand what's happening around you, because this is a pre-orchestrated move. And for you to kind of nullify a pre-orchestrated move, you have to think, you have to adapt, and you have to try to come up with a plan to nullify it. That happening in a millisecond is extremely difficult. You know, extremely difficult. So that's a Connacht move all over.
Well, does that explain why the other thing that happened a lot was a really super quick puck out taken almost before the ball is over the line from Cork, where one of the cornerbacks or a halfback has the ball and he's already in acres of space because Cork are in two minds. Do we drop back and make sure that we're not going to have one of those the long balls through that leaves us with a goal chance that we have to defend, or do we push up and make sure that we go really tight on the full forward line or the full back line? Is that where the uncertainty from Cork comes from?
Yeah, like it is. So Limerick, again, glad you asked that question. So when Limerick gets the ball poked out within 7 seconds, so when the ball passes the in line or passes, you know, goes over for a score, whatever, and Nicky gets the ball and he's poked out within 7 seconds, Limerick have a 77% chance of scoring. Just from the puck out. That's the bit. So like when he gets it out within 7 seconds, you have a 77%, well over 2/3 chance of a score coming off your own puck out, which is massive. So when Nicky's in the goals, he's saying, right, there's limited structure in the Cork defence, there's limited like kind of organisation across the board. Get the ball out quick, and you know we're 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 going to get a chance here. From Cork's perspective, they've got to be super tuned. You know, that's from the 15 right the way back. And often more times than not, like Nicky will go to because he's the left side of the goalie, he'll go out to his left side and they'll attack on the Hayes side. So how many possessions did you see Hayes get yesterday, or Barry Nash, you know, going up that wing? And like from a Cork perspective, lads, it takes massive amount of concentration. There was 2 or 3 puckouts yesterday when Cork were at 2s and 3s, kind of looking around themselves, and the puckout is gone. Yeah, too late. You're in trouble. If you scored a point straight away, you can't dwell on that and go, that's a lovely point, my name is in the score sheet. You need to be immediately, nearly subconsciously, competently turning and going exactly where you need to be. You know, it has to be symmetrical. It has to be really symmetry. You know, and that's what Limerick do. Limerick are fantastic at that. Now, in fairness, even if the Cork or the Limerick forwards, are a touch slow. Now, I use a touch is only a minutely percentage. They'll always have cover. Like O'Donoghue and O'Donovan are fantastic to providing link plays to the forwards, but also covering that defence. So they'll assess the opportunity and say, right, we got to get back here, you know. And Limerick will get caught the odd time. You saw yesterday for Kingston's goal. That's just the odd time to get caught. But like by the law of averages, the sum of all parts like will outweigh that individual run from Kingston, and they'll snuff it out.
Is that another string in the bow for the argument for playing zonally in general, James, because you're more used to that system, and even when you're attacking, there is some remnant of a zonal defence that might exist on the pitch and will allow you to reduce the percentage of that 2/3 stat that you had there to a smaller number, because you're just used to being in a shape and you can react better to what the goalkeeper might do within those 7 seconds.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're playing against Limerick, you have to have your 3 guys in the full back line. If he's a sweeper or not, so be it. You have to have your 3 full back line. I think you have to have 4 in your half back line. And I think you have to have your 2 in midfield and 4 in your half forward line. I think you need 2 centre forwards. So what you're talking about, I think you need 1 left and right of Declan Hannon, so you can occupy Hannon. You need your 2 midfielders and your 4 half forward line, or your 4 half back line. That's 13 people. Like, so you could be leaving 1 inside. You could be asking your half forward line to get up and support full forward line. So like systematically, something like that has to be done to Limerick, because they've seen the sweeper on. They've seen a +1 midfielder. They've seen kind of a packed defence, and they can get over all that. However, conceding goals against Limerick is a non-runner. It can't happen. Like, you need to get them to shoot your points. Like yesterday again, they scored 32 points, and that's hard enough in itself. I thought they'd get 30 points, but then when you tack on 3 goals beside it because of runners and the creation of space inside and basically no occupancy from a Cork defender, you're not going to win. So I think you need to pack your defence, and you need to structure your defence. And if they shoot from distance, well then so be it. At least you have a chance to create bodies there and see you run at them. But when you give them the opportunity to shoot from distance and to create space inside and create goals, you're done. You're done. Game over. Forget about it.
They also had a lot of wides yesterday, and I thought there were
17.
chances. Yeah, so that's why I don't think this is their greatest ever performance yet. We're still seeing a team who will hit a higher level of efficiency at some point in a match. Maybe the opposition will be better, but like there's more to come from them, I suppose, is my point.
Yeah, you're right. Like they hit 52 shots. Mother God, like the only another kind of interesting statistic was like Gillette only scored. I go back to the correction now. Within his own 65-yard line, he only scored 3 points from frees. I don't think he missed a free. Maybe he did. I don't think he did. But he scored 3 points in frees, and that's a sure sign that Cork lads couldn't get on the Limerick lads. If there was physical contact and it became a real battle, you'd always have your 8, 9, 10 frees, wouldn't you? You'd always see free takers with 11 points, 9 different frees. But when you see a free taker only 3 points from frees, it's a sure sign they weren't touched. So for them to score 3, probably 27, 28 from play, I mean, it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. So, and we spoke about their efficiency last week. So they had 52 shots and got 35 scores, which isn't the most efficient that they've ever done. So there's room for improvement for them as well. And so if they're improving, you have to close the gap quicker than at the rate they improve, which is frightening. It's very, very frightening, but the world we live in. And look, it is a privilege, I have to say, to be able to witness it and to watch them. I was at the final in 2008 when Kinney dismantled Waterford, and I thought, geez, that's the most complete performance I'll ever see. They give man the match to Brian Cody, mother of God. And then you look at yesterday's game and you think that is just the best performance I have ever seen in my life. And can it get better? The answer is yes.
Can I ask you about Limerick's edge, James? Because they do have a level of aggression that maybe is also the most aggressive in the country right now. And for example, the Graham Mulcahy incident where he broke a hurl that was on the ground. Have you ever seen that on the pitch before?
Loads of times. Yeah, loads of times. Like, you're in the heat of the moment, like, I caught a fella's hurl one day and threw it out over the back net. It's just like, these things happen in the heat of the moment. Then when you do it, you go, should have done that. You know what I mean? But the big difference is Graham Mulcahy was caught on camera. And it was probably a needless thing to do. Let's say if the game was a bit hotter or in the melting pot, I'd say, I'd give him some credit. But like, Graham is a nice fella, and I don't know what was going through his head there, to be honest. But
15 points up, James. That is serious. That is taken to a whole new level.
Like, and that when you think of the hurl and the grip, that's €30. Like, these after smashing. Jesus. Probably needless, but to answer your question, there is a level of aggression. They mix aggression with intent. So their intent is always the ball. I don't think their intent is the man, to be honest. So like when you look at the guys tackling, it can look a bit rough-edged at times. I understand that. Like I see that myself. But their intent is always the ball, and that's evident in the likes of Sean Flynn. He's a brilliant tackler, always on the ball. Takes a lot of heat himself because guys are coming at him trying to bring him down because he's the best number 2 in the country. But he's always stick to the process and stick to what's his job. And then if you hear the likes of John Kiley talking, he's always hammering home the same message. It's about the collective, it's about our job, our performance. and all that is aimed towards success. And when you mix in the likes of aggression, quality players, who can tackle really well, and their ability to play the hand, like, so obviously hooking the block is the most obvious method of tackling you could see. But their ability to get the hand in and stop your hand from throwing the ball onto the hurl, or if you've the ball caught twice, to make you strike under pressure, is second to none. Like, they bottle you up, take your free hand so you can't get the ball out. You're actually forced to drop it. You're forced to overcarry it, or they turn you over, let's say, by taking it out of your hand. So it's just, I run out of words to say about them, because I keep looking at them year in, year out for the last number of years, saying, how do you beat them? How do you beat them? And I just come back to the same point. Some of all parts against them, lads. Like, you have to be in a collective, and you have to be training as hard as they are with the volume of training they've done, and that's not happening anytime soon.
With the stats that you've given us, is it fair to say Cian Lynch is your hurler of the year?
Oh, do you know what? I wouldn't even nominate two of the lads. I wouldn't even defend them. I just say, Cian, here's the trophy. That's it. I wouldn't even give three names. I just say Cian Lynch, hurler of the year, and like, it was so good, give it to him next year. He's awesome stuff. That's like, I think honourable mentions, right? Because when I went through the All-Star team, like, I looked at the Sunday game team of the year, let's say, and I had a couple of disagreements in it. But like Cian Lynch, I fundamentally agree with him 100%. But Sean Finn deserves an honourable mention, I think, to be honest. Like, he was fantastic for Limerick. I do think Seamus Flanagan deserves an honourable mention because of the way he held the ball for Limerick and the scores he got. And then beyond that, like, who else do you mention? Do you know what I mean? That's the size of it.
You'd have to give Kyle Hayes an honourable mention up until throw-in yesterday, right?
Yeah, like, he was like, again, in terms of influence, like, he's a very influential player for Limerick, that's for sure. Like, is he, a stupid question, is he as important as Sean Finn? Sean Finn is an expert defender. Kyle Hayes is a hybrid, bit of defending, bit of attacking, so like, and then Flanagan, the way he operates. Look, I could toss the coin here and pick Sean Finn today. I could toss the coin and pick Kyle Hayes tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? It's just the way I'm looking at them. This is the way I'm feeling at the minute. Tomorrow could be different entirely.
Do we underrate Nicky Quaid's puckouts, given that confusion that we were talking about earlier? That comes directly from his ability to ping it anywhere.
Unbelievable. And like, I was so surprised when I was watching the Sunday game last night. I hate to mention it again, but when they were picking Owen Murphy, and Owen Murphy, Jesus, he knows this now when I say this, like, he's a top class goalie, probably the best goalie in history is Owen Murphy, okay? But in terms of this year, in terms of influence and execution, Nicky Quaid is your all-star. That's it. Nicky Quaid is your all-star. Like, his fingerprint on how to execute a game plan is there all over that. And it's not to diminish what Owen Murphy's influence on Kilkenny, but when I look at Kilkenny puckouts, it's more of a traditional approach where let's go down to 10 or 12 horses down there and we see how that goes, which I think the level of, I suppose, influence is lower than what Nicky is. Nicky is actually processing this in real time and putting the ball into a zone that Limerick will have practice, or that they'll need to get on the cosh, whatever. And he's the quarterback. So there's no point saying the game was evolved or the goalkeeper is now the new quarterback, etc., if you don't give the person who's actually the quarterback plaudits. So Nicky Quaid is my all-star. Like Owen Murphy will get 2 or 3 more all-stars by the time he finishes, which is fine. But Nicky Quaid deserves to be the all-star this year. And I do think we underestimate his influence.
That's a good case, well made. We'll get killed by everybody watching if we don't ask you. Things obviously got a little bit heated. Are they stitches on your forehead, or?
Well, sure. I was talking when I should have been listening. No, would you believe I was training an under-16 team at the weekend, and I got in too close, and one of them just hit me with the hurl, accidentally, of course. Don't look at me wrong, but when I came home, my wife didn't know what was going on. She thought I was in the wars again. But yeah, no stitches, can't stitches. Just too much skin got over. So that's, under 16s. That's the danger you have nowadays, coaching lads.
I thought it was a battle scar from a hot and heavy championship match in Galway, but obviously.
Oh, I should have said that to make it sound like a better story, but I give the under 16 credit for doing it to me.
Fair play, James. Great to have you with us. Thanks a million. Cheers.
See you guys. Good to see you.
More brilliant analysis this morning from James Skehill, giving us his thoughts on what happened yesterday, how it happened, and what the future holds. I think that's the other thing that is probably quite terrifying for a lot of hurling fans from counties that aren't from Limerick. If you're from Limerick, it's like, wow, this is amazing, because it looks like it's and you should really enjoy it, because right now is the sweet spot.